All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Friday, April 24th, 2020, and we are live. So everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms, your social media pages, invite your friends to tune in. So I wanted to deal with some things that have happened in the past couple of days, deal with an update, what's going on with coronavirus, deal with the unemployment numbers that came out on Thursday, April 23rd. 4.4 million more Americans filed for unemployment. Also want to deal with the $484 billion bill that Congress passed tied to this would be the really the fourth coronavirus bill. $484 billion to fund small businesses, hospitals, and for testing. $60 billion set aside basically for minorities, etc., for small businesses. So we're going to talk about that. And then also, Donald Trump this week also put a pause on immigration for 60 days. Okay, and this is a red herring. He's trying to find a scapegoat for his mishandling of the coronavirus crisis, but also mishandling of the economy. Because for all practical purposes, immigration was already shut down, one. Two, there are a lot of exceptions to this immigration pausing or immigration ban for 60 days. I want to talk some about this. And what he's trying to do is use immigrants as a scapegoat, because what he said was when the economy comes back up and businesses start bringing people back, he wants to protect these jobs for Americans, right? We've seen this before, and unfortunately a lot of people don't understand history, so we don't know this. Okay, we saw this in 1931 during the Great Depression with President Herbert Hoover, because Herbert Hoover during the Great Depression, starting in the early 1930s, Herbert Hoover, and then continues into the Franklin Roosevelt administration, 1.8 million Mexican Americans were deported from the U.S. back to Mexico during the Depression. 60% of them were born here and were here legally. President Herbert Hoover said that that the Mexicans were taking jobs away from Americans, specifically white people. And President Herbert Hoover had a campaign called American Jobs for Real Americans. This is the same thing Donald Trump is doing. It didn't work back then. It's not going to work now. Okay? If you understand history, you understand this game Trump is playing. He's lying. So we're going to deal with all of this, and I'm going to provide you with a number of different sources. Proper documentation ends all conversations, so you don't have to believe a word that I say. Go research this for yourself. How's everybody doing on YouTube? Everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms, okay? Because this is going to be a real history lesson. Also, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, and then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show. Okay, so and then also we saw this idiot at the White House coronavirus press conference on Thursday, Donald Trump, suggesting that you could somehow inject disinfectant into the human body to kill coronavirus. Inject Lysol, something like that. The company that makes Lysol has put out a statement saying under no circumstances should Lysol be ingested. And then he said that he suggested that you can use ultraviolet rays on the body to kill coronavirus somehow. Use ultraviolet rays on the body. So he's getting worse day by day. This is an example of how elections have consequences. Everybody's just sitting back looking at him. Even Republicans looking at him like, you simple Simon ass. They can't even believe this. Okay, so uh, this is what we're dealing with. He's getting worse day by day. He's under tremendous pressure. We see that the U.S. has reached a milestone of 50,000 deaths related to coronavirus as well. And so a lot of people are looking at this, and they're holding Trump responsible, as they should. All right, so let's look at I want to look at first an article from Washington Post. Washington Post, I read this when it came out on Thursday. Washington Post had a really good article. 4.4 million Americans sought jobless benefits last week as economic pain continued across the United States. 4.4 million Americans sought jobless benefits last week as economic pain continued across the United States. Okay, so I'm going to give you the name of a number of articles, and we'll post the links here on the thread of the broadcast when we're done. I want you to go read this information, okay? All right, so the White House and Congress have tried to arrest the downturn, but the coronavirus pandemic keeps pushing Americans out of the labor force, right? Now, when you go study President Herbert Hoover, who ran for president, he was a Republican, ran for president in 1928. He served one term. This was before presidents were limited to 2 terms, okay? He served one term. It was his mishandling of the Great Depression that cost him the election. President Roosevelt became president, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So more than 4.4 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits last week, according to the Labor Department, a signal the tidal wave of job losses continues to grow during the coronavirus pandemic. It's the 5th straight week that job losses were measured in the millions. The 5th straight week that job losses were measured in the millions. From March 15th to April 18th, 26.5 million people have probably been laid off or furloughed. The number of jobs lost is in that brief span effectively erased all jobs created after the 2008 financial crisis. Jobless figures on this scale have not been seen since the Great Depression. Now let's pause right here for a minute. This idiot was supposed to be the big businessman. He was supposed to make America great again. He was supposed to bring back manufacturing. He was supposed to take America to places you've never seen before. Well, he's doing that. We had never seen we never seen no stuff like this before. Okay, but so 2010, the recovery starts under President Obama. You had 22 million jobs basically created going back to 2010. In 5 weeks, this idiot has wiped out all the job recovery, actually going back to 2008. The number of jobs lost in that brief span, in 5 weeks, the number of jobs lost in that brief span effectively erased all jobs created after the 2008 financial crisis. So going back to 2010, if you watch the broadcast I did last week, Thursday, when the job numbers came out, in 6.6 million people, or let's see, I think it was 5 million last week, 5 million the previous week, 5 million filed for unemployment. We talked about this, okay? So let's see, let's go back to the article came out April 16th, 2020 from Washington Post. U.S. now has 22 million unemployed, wiping out a decade of job gains. This is the article from the Washington Post, April 16th, 2020. And it says the United States has not seen this level of job loss since the Great Depression, and the government is struggling to respond fast enough to the deadly coronavirus health crisis and the widespread economic pain it triggered. It said it's a staggering loss of jobs that has wiped out a decade of employment gains and pushed families to line up at food banks as they await government help. Now, this is the article from April 16th, okay, when that week I think it was 5 million who applied for unemployment. So, and they talk about how they go back to 2010 with the recovery in 2010. The eye-popping job losses in the past month have erased virtually all of the 22.8 million jobs gained since 2010 as the nation rebounded from the Great Recession. Okay, so that's on page 2 of this article. So this is the one from Washington Post, April 16th, 2020. U.S. now has 22 million unemployed, wiping out a decade of job gains. This is the one from last week when unemployment numbers came out last week, Thursday. Okay, this is the one from Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. 4.4 million Americans sought jobless benefits last week as economic pain continues across the United States. So what's happening is that all of the job gains, 22 million jobs created since 2010, starting under President Barack Obama. Most of those jobs created under President Barack Obama. Nobody wants to talk about this. Very few people want to talk about this. Donald Trump doesn't want to give him any credit. In 5 weeks, this unstable genius who's talking about injecting disinfectant into you, experimented with injecting disinfectant into somebody to kill coronavirus. In 5 weeks, he's wiped out all of the job gains in 10 years. And he's supposed to be the big businessman. He's supposed to make America great again. He's supposed to take the economy to places we've never seen before. He's actually doing that. We ain't never seen no stuff like this before. Okay? Now, what do you think would happen if President Obama lost 26 million jobs in 5 weeks? You know, can't no Negro lose 26 million jobs in 5 weeks and still have a job. You know, only a white man could get away with something like that. You know, can't no Negro lose 26 million jobs in 5 weeks and still have a job. This is an example of how elections have consequences, because a lot of African Americans are losing jobs and businesses behind this fiduciary malfeasance. This is what happens when you have somebody who ignores the scientists. This is what happens when you have somebody who doesn't want to hear bad news, doesn't want people to tell them the truth. This is what happens when you have poor leadership and people who make bad decisions. African Americans suffer because of this. This is an example of how elections have consequences. Now, on my show Sunday night, how's everybody doing on social media? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. We have Jan Lisa, Lori, Wise Warrior, Cosmically Made. On my show Sunday night, listen to my Sunday night show, the African History Network show. What I'm going to do is an update to the broadcast I did on March 10th. March 10th was, I think it was March 10th, when we had the primary here in the state of Michigan. And I did a broadcast comparing the policies of Bernie Sanders to the policies of Joe Biden. And also Mike Bloomberg. Because you have people on social media saying, oh, Mike Bloomberg, he has a black agenda, so we should vote for Mike Bloomberg. Well, Mike Bloomberg dropped out of the race and endorsed Joe Biden. And since I did that broadcast March 10th, Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race, endorsed Joe Biden. Senator Elizabeth Warren dropped out of the race, endorsed Joe Biden. President Barack Obama has endorsed Joe Biden. So we're going to look at the policies of Joe Biden and how they benefit the African American community. A lot of people have not read his policies. If you haven't read them, then you should stay quiet. I've gone and read them, as well as Bernie Sanders, as well as Mike Bloomberg, as well as Buttigieg, as well as Elizabeth Warren. So we're going to break this down on my Sunday night show, the African History Network show, which is on Sundays 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF here in Detroit, and then we also broadcast on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. Okay, so we'll deal with that, and we'll also deal with understanding principles of political self-defense. We'll deal with political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans. So when we look at any of these candidates, whether it's president, mayor, city council, what have you, it's not just about what someone can do for you. is also understanding how to block things that people are trying to do to you. And oftentimes this gets left out, because if we understood political self-defense in 2016, we will understand how to protect gains that were made under the 8 years of President Obama, and understand Trump as a threat trying to reverse those gains. But how do you protect gains that were made if you're under the misconception that no gains were made? So right now, Donald Trump's Department of Justice, his Attorney General, is in court trying to repeal the entire Affordable Health Care Act and kick at least 20 million people off of health care. Well, the Affordable Health Care Act gave health care to 3 million non-elderly African Americans who did not already have health care. The Affordable Health Care Act gave health care to 3 million non-elderly African Americans who did not already have health care. What this did was also, this extended the life expectancy for African Americans to the highest point basically in history, about 72 and a half years. There are less African Americans today who have health care because of attacks on the Affordable Health Care Act. When we look at COVID-19 and how this has exposed disparity in health care and poverty and things like this in the African American community, because it's a respiratory illness, a respiratory disease, on MSNBC on Thursday, and I have to find this clip, one of the things they talked about was how air pollution and poor quality air is attacking African Americans and making them, and because of asthma, bronchitis, things like this, is making us more susceptible to COVID-19. Because we know, because of environmental racism, in African American communities, you're likely to have more pollution, more illegal dumping, more exposure to chemicals, more plants, things like this. What a lot of people don't know is that over the past 3 years, you've had a deterioration in the quality of air across America. That is directly tied to 95 environmental regulations that the Trump administration has either weakened or entirely rolled back. These were regulations that were put in place by the Obama administration or kept in place by the Obama administration that the Trump administration has attacked. Now the regulations don't say black or African American, but they impact African Americans. The deterioration in the quality of air, it doesn't say black air, but it impacts African Americans. If you look at the September 2019 census report, because there's an annual census report that comes out every 10 years. There's an annual census report that comes out every 10 years. But there's a census report that comes out every 10 years. So right now we're in the process of conducting the census. But there's an annual census report that comes out every September. The annual census report deals with income and poverty. And when you read the annual census report, it talks about the deterioration in the quality of air and how this is tied to environmental regulations. So on a number of different levels, these threats coming towards us, we didn't see. So this is something I'm going to break down on my Sunday night show. Okay, so you don't want to miss that. All right, because there's a whole lot of people talking, and this information that I'm going to share with you on my Sunday night show, most of them are not sharing this because most of them don't know it. Why? Because they haven't done the research. Okay, there's a huge article from New York Times. I'm going to give you this, and then we're going to continue here because I don't want this to be a 3-hour broadcast because I have a lot of other things to do. Jan Lisa, okay, how's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Jan Lisa, Lori, Wise Warrior. Let me see if I can pull this one up here from New York Times. But all across the board, these policies impact us. The policy does not have to say black or African American to benefit you or to harm you. And so I'm somebody who studies policy. Okay? One of the reasons why I study policy is because I've been involved in writing public policy for the city of Detroit. So that gave me a better understanding of policy and how policy impacts us. Let me see here. Let me try to pull this up. I think this was New York Times. Let me see here. No, that's not it. Okay, well. Okay, we'll pull this. Oh, I think this is it right here. 95 environmental rules being rolled back under Trump. This was last updated December 21st, 2019. This is from New York Times. 95 environmental rules being rolled back under Trump. Okay? Everything dealing with air pollution. There have been 58 rollbacks, 37 rollbacks in process. Okay, we'll post this link here on the thread of the broadcast. Go read this. Now, these don't say black or African American, but they impact the air that we breathe and the quality of the air that we breathe, which impacts your health. And when you don't have health insurance, environmental racism becomes more prevalent, becomes more exposed. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Politics impacts every aspect of our life, from the water we drink to the air we breathe to the food we eat. Okay, let's continue here. So, let's go back to this article from Washington Post from April 23rd, 2020. 4.4 million Americans sought jobless benefits last week as economic pain continued across the United States. Also, everybody read this here, because I had it here, I meant to tell you. This is at whitehouse.gov, progress of the African American community during the Obama administration. Progress of the African American community during the Obama administration. You've heard me talk about this before. Very few people talk about this because they don't know it exists. This is at whitehouse.gov. What this does is breaks down by category how the policies President Barack Obama were beneficial to African Americans. Most of these policies have either been reversed or severely under attack by the Trump administration. This was up during, I knew about it in I think I first probably heard about it in 2014. Okay? If we knew about this on election day in 2016, Trump would not be president right now. Because when Donald Trump asked us what the hell do we have to lose, we would have said everything. And we would have been able to go down and break this down. But because we don't understand, many of us don't understand this and don't do research, we didn't know it. So now these have either been severely reversed, weakened, or under attack. Okay, so the new weekly total comes on top of 22 million Americans who had sought benefits in previous weeks, a volume that has overwhelmed state systems for processing unemployment claims. So you still have state systems that are crashing because so many people are applying for unemployment. Economists estimate the national unemployment rate sits between 15 and 20%, much higher than it was during the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009. The unemployment rate at the peak of the Great Depression was about 25%. Now, once again, a few weeks ago, CNBC.com estimated that 47 million people were going to end up filing for unemployment. I think they said probably by June. We're at 26 million now. Okay? And you still have millions more who have not been able to file for unemployment because the website keeps crashing or they may not have access to the internet. And I see stories like on MSNBC where people are calling on the phone, calling the unemployment office, the state unemployment office, and they call dozens of times and can't get through. So there are millions more who are unemployed but haven't been able to file for unemployment. What we're seeing in the unemployment numbers that came out Thursday, August 23rd, is that this is also spreading to white collar workers. As there's a decrease in sales at various companies, as companies are reducing hours of retail stores, things like this, as there's less of a demand for certain products, we're seeing white collar workers now filing for unemployment. So economists estimate the national unemployment rate now sits between 15 and 20%. The peak of unemployment during the Great Depression, which starts in 1929 with the stock market crash in 1929, the peak of unemployment during the Great Depression was 25%. So the new weekly jobless claims figure came in around economists' predictions, which were expected to be staggering but not growing, which is a small mercy, said Julia Pollack, a labor economist at ZipRecruiter. For comparison, 5.2 million people filed unemployment claims for the week ending April 11th, so the previous week. 5.2 million filed the previous week. So it's a downward trend for now, but who knows, it could go up. Once these people who've already been unemployed for 2 or 3 weeks and haven't been able to file on the website and can't get through on the phone, once they can file, the next one, it could be higher than 4.4 million. So as the coronavirus began spreading in the United States early this year, many businesses rapidly began to close. Hotels, restaurants, and airlines were hit particularly hard, but few businesses were immune from the economic toll. The problems have only worsened each week as more Americans reduce their spending and more businesses cut workers because income has fallen sharply. Now, Julia Pollack, a labor economist at ZipRecruiter, said many businesses quickly cut to the bone. Many businesses quickly cut to the bone when they realized how the pandemic would gut sales. Now, many of the new layoffs stem from businesses like news organizations, media, news outlets, news organizations, and tech companies that were not directly affected by people staying home but are suffering the consequences of vanishing ad revenue, advertising revenue, and paid subscriptions. A decline in ad revenue and paid subscriptions is causing white-collar workers of these various companies to be laid off. So they're filing for unemployment. I mean, this is deep. Okay? Jay King, thanks for your Cash App donation. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay? You can donate $ the AHN show on Cash App, $ the AHN show on Cash App. Then also paypal.me/the AHN show through PayPal. Okay, that helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, upgrading equipment. I was able to buy a mixer, so now if you hear me better, you know, I got my old microphone. I was able to use this. I hooked it up. I bought a Behringer mixer from Micro Center, $220 mixer, 12-channel mixer. I'm trying to upgrade things, so thanks for the support. I really appreciate that. Okay, and you know, if you're in a situation now you can't donate, I totally understand. Okay, keep watching, keep sharing the information. If you can donate 5, 10, 15, 25, whatever it is, definitely appreciate that. Okay, but if you're in a situation where you can't, don't feel bad about it. Totally understand that. Okay, all right. And then also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. Okay. All right. And just a second here. Okay, let's continue here. So the problems have only worsened each week as Americans reduce their spending and more businesses cut workers because income has fallen so sharply. Now, Julia Pollack, who's a labor economist at ZipRecruiter, said many businesses quickly cut to the bone when they realized how the global pandemic would gut sales. Now, many of the new layoffs stem from businesses like news organizations and technology companies that were not directly affected by people staying home, but are suffering the consequences of vanishing advertising revenue and paid subscriptions. She said, quote, "We see declines across every major industry and state, although the declines hit industries at different times." So this is having wide-ranging impact all across the country in industries across the country. So meanwhile, consumer spending, the engine behind the longest economic expansion in U.S. history, has evaporated. Consumer spending. So shortly, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get to Donald Trump's quote-unquote immigration ban for 60 days, pausing immigration for 60 days. This is a red herring. This is a distraction because he's looking for a scapegoat. Consumer spending is basically evaporated, largely evaporated. He can't run on the great economy. It don't exist. You can't brag about a great economy and 26 million people are unemployed, and there's going to be millions more who are going to file for unemployment. So what he's going to try to do, what he's trying to do now, and then he tried to blame the World Health Organization, but then he got exposed in the media once again because Washington Post came out with the article. Is this the one? They came out with the article dealing with how people at the World Health Organization were giving updates to the Trump administration and totally contradicting the lies that he was telling. Let me see, where's that article here? I have it here. That deals with Spanish flu. Be sure to watch the my Sunday night show. Be sure to watch the show from April 19th, the April 19th edition of the African History Network show, because I dealt with also the second wave of the Spanish flu, 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, and why it was worse than the first wave. Okay, let me see. Let's go back and let's look at this here. There's one. I thought I printed this up from dealing with the World Health Organization, because he said he was going to cut off funding to the World Health Organization, and then he got exposed in another lie. Let me see here. I thought I had that printed up. Just a second here. These are all articles that I've printed, and that one was just from this past week. Okay, I have to print that one up. I thought I printed it. But we'll find that one. I'll find that one for you. I'll post it. We'll put it in the notes of the broadcast. Let's see. The White House and Congress have tried to intervene, but with limited impact so far. New funding for small businesses in a $2 trillion March emergency spending package quickly dried up in the face of overwhelming demand, prompting the Senate to expand funding by $310 billion on Tuesday, passed by the U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday, April 23rd. It's a total $484 billion bill. $310 billion for small businesses, $60 billion set aside for basically women and minority-owned businesses, and their term minority, not mine. And it's sending that $60 billion to like small banks and credit unions, etc. Okay, so the bill would direct an additional $60 billion to a separate small business emergency grant and loan program. The House approved the measure 388 to 5 on Thursday afternoon, April 23rd. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of Brooklyn, her district is in Brooklyn, or at least partly Brooklyn. She voted against it. She said it wasn't enough for her district, etc. Okay, whatever. Even with all the new government spending, hopes for a sharp economic rebound are fading, overtaken by the public fear of going back to restaurants, movie theaters, schools, and gyms. Okay, we see Governor Brian Kemp, dumbass Brian Kemp of Georgia, is opening up hair salons and barbershops and things like this, gyms, etc. in Georgia. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, African American female mayor of Atlanta, she's telling people to stay home. Don't listen to this fool. Because a lot of these Republican governors trying to open back up the economy so quickly, they're going to end up getting a lot of people killed. A lot of people are going to catch coronavirus, and some of them are going to die. Listen to these dumbasses. And now, what's interesting at the White House coronavirus press conference on Thursday, April 23rd, dumbass Donald Trump, even though he's talking about injecting disinfectant, experimenting with injecting disinfectant into people to kill coronavirus, because it'll kill it, because like Lysol or bleach will kill coronavirus on surfaces. But the doctors are sitting there looking at this idiot like, no, you can't inject this into the human body under no circumstances. Okay? But even Donald Trump disagreed with Governor Brian Kemp of opening back up the economy and opening back up these businesses at this point in time. Because one of the guidelines of one of the stipulations of the guidelines coming from the White House for opening back up the economy, which Trump did not shut down, by the way, okay, is you have to have 14 consecutive days of declining cases of coronavirus. Georgia doesn't have that. These other Republican states that are opening up, they don't have that. And they're going to end up getting a lot of people killed. Listen to their dumbasses. Okay? So, this is an example of how elections have consequences, and I guarantee you, if Stacey Abrams had become governor of the great state of Georgia, she would not do something stupid like this. She would exercise more judgment, she would be more responsible, and she would save more people's lives. I guarantee you, Stacey Abrams was the governor. I guarantee you, if Andrew Gilliam had become governor of the state of Florida, he would exercise better judgment. He would save more lives. He would not do stupid things like Governor Ron DeSantis is doing. I guarantee you, he would have shut down businesses earlier. He would have shut down the beaches. He wouldn't play these games. This is an example of how elections have consequences. This is understanding political self-defense. Okay, let's continue here. So, even with all the new government spending, hopes for a sharp rebound are fading, overtaken by the public fear of going back to restaurants, movie theaters, schools, and gyms. The growing possibility of a W-shaped recovery in which a resurgence of the virus or a spike in defaults and bankruptcies triggers another downturn in the economy has analysts reframing what a reopened or rehabilitated economy might look like. The worst is yet to come. The impact on the economy, the worst is probably yet to come. So this year defies historical comparison. In the year 2020, 28 million people have filed for unemployment benefits. Halfway through the fourth month of the year, the figure has already eclipsed the full year totals of every year except 1982, when 30.4 million people filed for unemployment. And then the year 2009, when 29.8 million people filed for unemployment. This right here, this will probably eclipse that in week 6. Because you're already at 26 million. 26.5 million right now. We'll probably eclipse that in week 6 under the unstable genius, under the big businessman who's supposed to make America great again and bring back all the industries. And we're going to take the economy to heights you've never seen before. So at this rate, it will overtake both within a week or so. So less than half of working age Americans will be earning a wage next month, said James Knightley, who's an economist with ING. He's a chief international economist with ING. He said less than half of working age Americans will be earning a wage next month. We know, based upon the reporting from that I did on my Sunday, April 19th show, the African History Network show, we know that 10% of people in Michigan have filed for unemployment. There are 10 million people in Michigan. 10% of the population is unemployed. This is, I forgot what percentage of working age. I can't remember if it was like 1 out of 4 working age people in Michigan or something. 10 million people in Michigan. 10% unemployed. In 1 week, 385,000 filed for unemployment. And the website keeps crashing in Michigan. Wait till they can actually get through and file for unemployment. Some of these people voted for Donald Trump. So James Knightley said, in an election year, this means that the call for politicians to reopen the economy is only going to get louder, irrespective of the health advice. Donald Trump yesterday in the press conference is trying to say maybe the coronavirus won't come back in the winter. Dr. Anthony Fauci said we will have coronavirus in the winter. It's not going to disappear. Usually with viruses, usually in the summer when you have higher temperatures, usually the virus, the reported cases of the virus, the activity of it dies down. Then it comes back in the winter. And it can mutate and come back harder in the winter. This is what happened with the Spanish flu, the great pandemic of 1918. That second wave came, the virus mutated, and that second wave came back even harder. Donald Trump has no clue what he's talking about. He's trying to sell happy talk because he can't run on a great economy. He can't run on the stock market. So what he's trying to run on now is happy talk. In 5 weeks, 9.4% of the working age population has filed for unemployment insurance, said Nick Bunker, Bunker, who is Director of Economic Research at Indeed Hiring Labs. That's about twice the share of the population that lost a job during the Great Recession. That's about twice the share of the population that lost a job during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. In some states, such as the state of Michigan, where I am, about 1 in 4 workers has filed an unemployment claim in the past few weeks. So Nick Bunker said the numbers detailing the shock to the U.S. labor market are so large and cover such a short period of time, that your first reaction is that this is a typo. But it's not. Some people may think it's a dream, but it's not. Trump is a nightmare, but this is not a dream. This is reality. So as part of its sprawling stimulus package, Washington, D.C. has rolled out relief for millions of households and small businesses struggling to make ends meet. But money for struggling businesses quickly ran dry, and system glitches have prevented $1,200 stimulus checks from reaching some of the neediest people. So Washington Post has an additional article here. We'll pull this up. You have some stimulus checks going to dead people. You have delays in some people getting stimulus checks. So 80 million checks have gone out. All of them haven't reached the intended target. And if you go back and listen to our broadcast, going up to this, leading up to the first check going out, I said, the projections that Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is giving out about when people are going to get checks and all this stuff, I said, that's really aggressive. On Tuesday, the Senate, so that would be the 20th, I think, April 20th. The U.S. Senate passed a bill to expand the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses by $310 billion and flood a separate small business emergency grant and loan initiative by an additional $60 billion. Meanwhile, many low-income veterans and Social Security recipients still have not received the stimulus money in their bank accounts. Many of them are African American. Many of them are African American. Talk about how elections have consequences. All this impacts us. Unfortunately, many people don't understand how this impacts us. How many black people you know on Social Security who wait for their $1,200 stimulus check? How many people you know who are veterans, served in the military? We know Trump ain't one of them. Nobody in his family has ever served in the military. But how many people you know who are veterans who are waiting for the stimulus check? My dad is a veteran. So this impacts African Americans, even though this don't say black stimulus check. This don't say black Social Security. Okay, how's everybody doing on YouTube? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. If you have a question, you can post your question here also. Okay, let's continue. So, let me see, this computer's freezing up. Luckily, I have this article printed out. So in some states, as Michigan, about 1 in 4 workers have filed an unemployment claim in the past 4 weeks. Remember, Michigan is a swing state. I mean, Michigan is a battleground state. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Those people are going to remember this come election day. They're going to remember how they got screwed by Trump come election day, many of them. Okay? So employers are also unlikely to be hiring at the same levels they were hiring before the pandemic. As of April 16th, job postings on Indeed.com, the recruiting website, Indeed.com. As of April 16th, job postings on Indeed.com were down 34% compared to last year, Nick Bunker said. The job losses, like the epidemic itself, have not fallen evenly across the country. In 3 states, Hawaii, Kentucky, and Michigan, about 1 in 4 workers have filed for unemployment benefits in the past 5 weeks. Hawaii, Kentucky, and Michigan. Okay, we see it here. I see it here in the state of Michigan. I see it here in Detroit. In Michigan, plant shutdowns and furloughs have ravaged the manufacturing economy, which had only recently recovered all the jobs it lost in the Great Recession. On the opposite side of the ledger sits South Dakota, the state of South Dakota, where Republican Governor Kristi L. Noem, N-O-E-M, has resisted calls to lock down the state's businesses to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Only 6% of the state's labor force has applied for unemployment benefits. It may be a regional trend. Neighboring states, Wyoming and Nebraska and nearby Utah, also have unusually low unemployment claim numbers. So U.S. markets flash. Okay, so let's see. So as part of its sprawling stimulus package, Washington has rolled out relief for millions of households and small businesses struggling to make ends meet. But money for the struggling businesses quickly ran dry, and system glitches have prevented $1,200 stimulus checks from reaching some of the neediest people who need it. So many low-income veterans and Social Security recipients still have not received the stimulus money in their bank accounts, while other IRS checks are going to dead people. Washington Post, New York Times, NBC News, there are articles dealing with this. Okay, stimulus checks going to dead people. So people who did not file tax returns last year or don't have direct deposit information may have weeks more to wait. Go to irs.gov/coronavirus. They have information there for you to update your direct deposit information or how you want to receive your check. irs.gov/coronavirus. So in the wake of the Great Recession, the number of unemployed about 15 million was significantly higher than the number who claimed benefits, and the unemployment rate still peaked at just 10% during the Great Recession. Economists expect the United States to blow by that figure when April's jobs data are released on Friday, May 8th. Granted, this comes as unemployment eligibility and benefits have been greatly expanded. The government has relied on the unemployment insurance system to deliver relief to out-of-work Americans as it forces millions of businesses to close during temporary stay-at-home orders. The soaring numbers are for once a sign of the system working as intended. Okay, so check out this article from Washington Post. 4.4 million Americans sought jobless benefits last week as economic pain continued across the United States. Okay, that's at WashingtonPost.com. That's by Rachel Siegel, Siegel, from April 23rd, 2020. NBCNews.com is a good article also that I read. U.S. jobless claims reached 26 million since coronavirus hit, wiping out all gains since 2008 recession. What an unstable genius this is. In just 1 month, all job gains since the Great Recession disappeared, according to new data released Thursday, April 23rd by the Department of Labor. The economy had created around 22 million jobs since 2010, it's President Barack Obama, since 2010, during a historic decade of economic expansion that came to an abrupt end in February. Because we know that there were 113 consecutive months of private sector job growth that ended under Trump when the March numbers came out. When early March, when the job numbers came out, that ended. There was 701,000 jobs lost in February. Okay, I think that was February 2020. 701,000 jobs were lost. That job loss ended 113 consecutive months of private sector job growth. So read this also from NBCNews.com. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I wanted to give you an update on what's going on there. We see also America has passed the 50,000 case threshold. Oh, I'm sorry, 50,000 death threshold. So we're at a little over 50,000 deaths in the U.S. About 870, a little over 872,000 confirmed cases, and there have been, when we look at testing in the U.S., there have been 4.6 million total tests administered in the U.S. Okay, America, of course, is number one in reported cases. America is also number one in reported deaths. When we look worldwide, we see that there are 2.7 million confirmed cases worldwide and about 193,000 deaths worldwide as well. Also, we see that when we look at the total number of people recovered worldwide, it's approximately 753,000 who have totally recovered worldwide. And in the U.S., that number is right about 81,000 who have recovered, okay, as of basically April 23rd, 2020. Check out the tracking of this from Johns Hopkins University at rcgis.com, arcus.com, arcgis.com, arcgis.com, okay? And they have some of the best tracking there at Johns Hopkins University. All right, so let's look quickly here at the $484 billion $484 billion bill that the Senate has passed. I talked about it briefly here. We see that Congress has passed the $484 billion bill. This is the fourth, basically, coronavirus bill. LA Times had an article from a couple of days ago dealing with this also. Senate votes to increase funding for small businesses dealing with coronavirus shutdown. This is from the Los Angeles Times. It's from April 21st, 2020. And they had to come out with this additional bill because the $349 billion set aside for small businesses, that evaporated in 2 weeks. You had corporations like Shake Shack and Ruth's Steaks who got millions of dollars. They were exposed. They gave the money back. Okay, Shake Shack got 10 million. Ruth's Steaks got 20 million, something like $20 million. So the program exhausted its original $340 billion last week, but efforts to immediately replenish funding stalled as Democrats and Republicans argued over what else to include in an interim spending bill. An agreement was reached Tuesday in the Senate. The measure sets aside $60 billion to be lent by smaller banking institutions. So let's see. The Democrats said that thanks to their efforts, the bill provides $220 billion in additional money for hospitals, testing, COVID-19 testing, and some of the neediest small businesses. They faulted Senate Republicans for initially refusing to negotiate over the measure. Okay, Senator Moscow Mitch McConnell, who hinted earlier this week that blue states, that states that lean Democratic, or states that have Democratic state legislatures and Democratic governors, should go bankrupt and file for bankruptcy protection. Okay, as opposed to getting aid from the federal government, getting help from the federal government. Okay, Governor Andrew Cuomo of the great state of New York, in his daily press conference, he informed Moscow Mitch McConnell that the state of New York contributes in federal taxes billions more than it actually takes out in federal taxes, where the state of Kentucky, that Moscow Mitch McConnell represents, takes out more in aid from the federal government than they contribute in federal taxes. So he said, who's bailing out who? So Senator Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, said they tried to jam through the bill, okay, adding that, referring to Republicans, adding that the final version is broader and better, okay? Oh, well, I think he's talking about Democrats. They tried to jam through the bill. Now, I think he's actually talking about the original bill that, he's talking about the original bill that Republicans wanted, because the original bill that they wanted, they really just wanted $250 billion for small businesses. That was it. Moscow Mitch McConnell tried to jam this through, and Democrats stopped him from doing that. So the measure sets aside $60 billion to be lent by smaller banking institutions such as credit unions in an attempt to increase the number of loans going to very small businesses or businesses without an existing relationship with a bank. Or businesses without an existing relationship with the bank. Democrats made this set aside a priority because many such businesses, including women and minority-owned companies, complained they were shut out of the initial phase of funding. Okay? Now, even though this is not perfect, this is going to help more African-American owned businesses, even though this may not be perfect, because Democrats do not control the U.S. Senate. They control the lower chamber, the House of Representatives. Even though this is not perfect, this will benefit more African-American owned businesses. However, if you do not apply for the money, you are guaranteed not to get the money. If you do not apply for the Paycheck Protection Program money for small businesses, you are guaranteed not to get the money. So Representative G.K. Butterfield, Democrat of New York, as part of the Congressional Black Caucus, said, "It seems that the large banks have tended to favor the pre-existing relationships, particularly those that have existing loans with these banks. That is discriminatory. We're trying to fix that." So the bill also includes $50 billion for a separate emergency loan program for small businesses. Okay? The bill also includes $50 billion for a separate emergency loan program for small businesses that are also out of money. $75 billion for hospitals, including rural hospitals, and $25 billion to increase COVID-19 testing. Of the $25 billion for testing, $11 billion is to help states, cities, tribes, like Native American tribes, things like this, and territories, increase testing and contact tracing capabilities, something experts have warned will be a necessary step in weighing when to reopen the economy. So the package also requires the Department of Health and Human Services to create and publish a national strategy for coronavirus testing, something that was a sticking point in the final hours of negotiations. So here is government impacting the economy that your business operates within. Here is government helping small businesses that were negatively impacted by the mishandling of this coronavirus crisis from the White House. This is understanding how elections have consequences. This is government impacting the economic environment your business operates within. And then we saw here, we see here in Detroit, Beaumont hospitals and Henry Ford hospitals, they have to lay off hundreds of healthcare workers, nurses and things like this. They have to lay off hundreds of them because there's a decline in revenue. There's a decline in revenue, and we see this in different states. Okay? And there was an article from Washington Post from April 9th that I talked about in my April 19th broadcast. This deals with how, since you have governors who've issued stay-at-home orders, and I'll find an article here. Since you have governors who've issued stay-at-home orders, in a lot of these stay-at-home orders, governors have, in their executive orders, various executive orders, they've put a stop to elective surgery procedures at hospitals. Elective surgery procedures generated a lot of revenue for hospitals. Since these hospitals have a decrease in revenue because they stopped doing elective surgery procedures, now they have to lay off staff. Then in the city of Detroit, last week, Mayor Mike Duggan announced that due to the fact that the 3 casinos here in the city of Detroit, Motor City Casino, Greektown, and MGM Grand, since they had been shut down because of an executive order for Governor Gretchen Whitmer, the city is losing out on $600,000 in taxes that the 3 casinos pay to the city of Detroit every day. $600,000, a total of $600,000 a day in taxes the 3 casinos were paying to the city of Detroit. Well, since the city of Detroit is not getting that tax revenue anymore, Mayor Mike Duggan announced that the city had to cut the budget by $348 million. They're going to have to lay off some workers, cut back on hours, renegotiate with vendors of the city of Detroit. So this is because oftentimes I hear people say, "Well, we're not going to vote for president. We're just going to vote locally." Local elections are important, but so is president. So is Congress, because the federal government impacts state government, which impacts city government. So when I go through, be sure to watch my Sunday night show, because when I break down political self-defense, all this will become clearer, because we don't understand political self-defense and how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans. So Chuck Schumer said, we made sure, maybe most importantly, that there be adequate money for a national testing regime, and that this administration be required to report, report to us very shortly on what their plan is to have national testing. Okay, Chuck Schumer said. All right, just a second here. Checking notifications. All right, so within 3 weeks, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar, is required to issue a report on current levels of coronavirus testing, including data on race and ethnicity, and information on rates of cases and hospitalizations. The Congressional Black Caucus has been pushing for this data to be released nationally based upon race and ethnicity, dealing with coronavirus, people who are diagnosed with it and people who die from it. Within 30 days, the department is required to issue a report on a strategic testing plan that assists states, localities, and tribes in understanding COVID-19 testing for both active infection and prior exposure. In that same time frame, states and localities that receive funding for testing are required to submit to the Department of Health and Human Services their plans for COVID-19 testing, including the number of test kits needed each month, month-by-month estimates of capacity, and a description of how they plan to use the funds. Okay, not included in the final version. And let me see here. Okay, so not included in the final version is $150 billion for state and local governments struggling with a drop in tax revenue. Democrats are trying to get this in. Republicans blocked this. Democrats sought the money, but Republicans in the White House insisted that issue be addressed in future relief measures. Why can't you address it now? Why can't you address it now? Democrats wanted an additional $150 billion in this bill to go to state and local governments struggling with a drop in tax revenue, like the city of Detroit, where the population is 80% African American. Well, this is an example of elections having consequences, and how who is in U.S. Congress, in the U.S. Congress, and the fact that Republicans control the U.S. Senate, how this is negatively impacting African Americans. Dumbass Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, spoke out against the bill, warning the cost of shutting down the U.S. economy was too high. This idiot was sitting up there. This idiot went to the Senate fitness room after he took a test for COVID-19. He's waiting for the results, and he's just going on business as usual. He didn't tell other people and senators around him that he took a test for COVID-19. He ended up being positive. He's swimming in the swimming pool. He went to the fitness room. And this dumbass says he spoke against the bill, warning the cost of shutting down the U.S. economy was too high. He needs to be voted out of office. I'm not sure if he's up for re-election November 3rd, 2020. Whenever he's up for re-election, he needs to be voted out of office. He said the virus bailouts have already cost over $2 trillion. He said this before the vote on Tuesday. He said our annual deficit this year will approach $4 trillion. We can't continue on this course. No amount of bailout dollars will stimulate an economy that's being strangled by quarantine. Well, why didn't you talk about how Donald Trump increased the national debt by $3 trillion. National debt has increased before the coronavirus bills. National debt increased at least $3 trillion under Trump. Okay, so check out this article from, you can read the rest of this from the Los Angeles Times. Senate votes to increase funding for small businesses dealing with coronavirus shutdowns. Okay, check that out from the Los Angeles Times. Then that's from April 21st, 2020. Then we see Washington Post, April 23rd, 2020. House passes $484 billion bill with money for small businesses, hospitals, and testing to battle coronavirus. So we saw that this was a historic vote in the House of Representatives. Many other House members, especially Democrats, were wearing face coverings and masks and things like this. Not gas masks like dumbass Matt Gaetz, Republican Matt Gaetz of Florida. Not that, but following the guidelines from the CDC and the White House guidelines. Okay. So in the Treasury Department, so a lot of people were concerned about publicly traded companies getting the money for small businesses, set aside for small businesses. The Treasury Department on Thursday, April 23rd, 2020, issued guidance making it much harder for publicly traded companies to qualify for money that was supposed to go to small businesses, threatening penalties in some cases if firms don't repay money they had already received. And the Federal Reserve announced that it would be disclosing the names of companies that receive funding, okay, Federal Reserve announced the Federal Reserve announced that it would be disclosing the names of companies that receive funding from some of its assistance programs after complaints that the central bank was not being transparent about where the taxpayer aid was going. Because this is a reallocation of taxpayer dollars. So the legislation that passed the House of Representatives on Thursday, April 23rd, was negotiated between the Trump administration and congressional leaders after the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program, created as part of Congress's $2.2 trillion economic stimulus package, ran out of money last week and stopped processing loans. The new measure includes $310 billion to replenish the program, $60 billion for a separate small business emergency loan and grant program, $75 billion for hospitals and healthcare providers, and $25 billion for a new coronavirus testing program. The Trump administration had initially asked Congress to approve $250 billion to bolster the Paycheck Protection Program with no strings attached, but Democrats refused. Okay, now I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but I study policy and I see whose policies are better for African Americans and also better for America in general. And it was Democrats who fought and made this bill better. And that if they controlled the U.S. Senate, there would have been even more in this bill. Okay. And then Associated Press has also reported that Donald Trump signs $484 billion measure to aid employers, hospitals. So Trump signed this into office on Friday, basically Friday morning or early afternoon. Donald Trump signed a $484 billion bill Friday to aid employers and hospitals under stress from the coronavirus pandemic that has killed more than 50,000 Americans and devastated broad swaths of the economy. The bill is the latest effort by the federal government to help keep afloat businesses that have had to close or dramatically alter their operations as states try to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Over the past 5 weeks, roughly 26 million people have filed for jobless aid, or about 1 in 6 U.S. workers. Trump thanked Congress for, quote, answering my call, end quote, to provide the critical assistance, and said it was, quote unquote, a tremendous victory. But easy passage of this aid installment belies a potentially bumpier path ahead for further legislation to address the crisis. Okay, Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Thursday said millions of people out of work, millions of people out of work. This is really a very, very, very sad day. We come to the floor with nearly 50,000 deaths, a huge number of people impacted, and the uncertainty of it all. Anchoring the bill is the Trump administration's $250 billion request to replenish a fund to help small and medium-sized businesses with payroll, rent, and other expenses. The program provides forgivable loans so businesses can continue paying workers while forced to stay closed for social distancing and stay-at-home orders. The legislation contains $100 billion demanded by Democrats for hospitals and a nationwide testing program, along with $60 billion for small banks and an alternative network of community development banks that focus on development in urban neighborhoods and rural areas ignored by many lenders. There's also $60 billion for small business loans and grants delivered through the Small Business Administration's existing disaster aid program. So you have $60 billion to go to small banks in urban areas and rural areas. And then there's another $60 billion for small business loans and grants delivered through the Small Business Administration's existing disaster aid program. Okay, check out this article from Associated Press, apnews.com. Trump signs $484 billion measure to aid employers' hospitals. All right, this article from Washington Post, you can read the rest of it because this is like 4 pages. I don't have time to get through all of it. House passes $484 billion bill with money for small businesses, hospitals, and testing to battle coronavirus. Okay, so that gives you more background information also. The article I was talking about dealing with hospitals and how coronavirus and the stay-at-home orders and not doing elective surgeries has negatively impacted the bottom line of hospitals. Cash-starved hospitals and doctor groups cut staff amid pandemic. Now, this is from April 9th, 2020, from the Washington Post. And it says hospital executives and analysts emphasize that not all the furloughed or fired workers are directly involved in treatment. See, whereas they talk about for hospitals already in bad financial shape before the outbreak, the loss of income has raised doubts about their stability to keep treating patients. And they talk about the elective surgeries and the decline in revenue of hospitals. Hospitals reported laying off staff due to financial difficulties, which further exacerbated workforce shortages and the hospital's ability to care for COVID-19 patients and the routine patient population. A report this week by the Inspector General for the Health and Human Services Department blamed the cash crunch for ill-timed layoffs and furloughs. They talk about Michigan's Beaumont Hospital. Michigan's Beaumont hospital system is one of the more financially stable hospital systems in the country. Under normal conditions, the company earns about $16 million each month in net operating income. But after postponing elective surgeries, Beaumont is losing about $100 million a month. Michigan's Beaumont Health Systems is losing about $100 million a month. So Beaumont announced layoffs this past week. Okay, so check this out from Washington Post. This is from April 9th, 2020. Cash-starved hospitals and doctor groups cut staff amid pandemic. Okay, so what I want to do now, I want to, let's see here. African American business owners supposed to name your business here on the thread of the broadcast. And we got some new advertisers also. The documentary Wilmington on Fire tells the story of the Wilmington Massacre of 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina. Before there was a Rosewood in 1923, before there was the Black Wall Street Massacre in June of 1921, you had the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. Visit the website wilmingtononfire.com, wilmingtononfire.com. And you can order the DVD or watch it on digital on demand through Vimeo. WilmingtonOnFire.com from director Christopher Everett. A lot of people are looking for something to read while they're quarantined. The book Black Heroes of Fire. Black Heroes of Fire is an excellent book by author DeKalb Walcott Jr. This tells the story of Engine Number 21. Engine Number 21 was Chicago's first organized, paid African-American firefighting company. Find out about their heroism in the book Black Heroes of Fire. The history of the first African-American fire company in Chicago is available right now at Amazon.com, and the website BlackHeroesOfFire.com by author DeKalb Walcott Jr. Now, a lot of people are looking for dating advice right about now, and they may want to sharpen up their math skills because they have children who are at home. LoyalDetermined.com. LoyalDetermined.com can help you with this. Now, Loyal Determined offers online dating courses for both men and women, which are easy to follow and will help you improve your existing relationship or assist you in making your next relationship succeed. LoyalDetermined.com also offers online math courses for students who want to sharpen their skills, and courses like Algebra and Algebra 2 in an engaging and effective way. Loyal Determined is constantly offering awesome new online courses to help you improve your life, so be sure to check their website frequently. Visit their website, LoyalDetermined.com. So a lot of people are looking for all different types of health products, okay, soaps and different things like this. And SageandElmApothecary.com can help you with this. SageandElmApothecary.com creates unique products, especially with you in mind. Their holistic approach to self-care formulate their product inventory. Okay, they have over 60 different products, including beautifully handcrafted soaps, natural toothpaste, hydrating oils, deodorant, face masks, shampoos, conditioners, and much, much more. Visit their website, SageandElmApothecary.com, APOTHECARY, SageandElmApothecary.com, to order their products and find out about upcoming vending events and pop-up shops. They also have a current promotion where you can get 20% off. Use the promo code AHNSPRING20, AHNSPRING20, to get a 20% discount off your order. Let them know you found out about this from the African History Network. Okay, and African American business owners, email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Current promotion, we have a couple more spots still open. Buy 1 month, get 2 months free. Okay, so this past week we heard that Donald Trump was going to suspend immigration. to this country for 60 days. All right, and there's a good article here from NBCnews.com dealing with this, and also Washington Post as well. I've read a number of different articles talking about this. But a lot of people ask, well, didn't he already suspend immigration? And the other thing is, there are a lot of loopholes in this as well. Trump halts immigration for 60 days. Here's what the president's order means. Trump halts immigration for 60 days. Here's what the president's order means. And as I said before at the beginning, I said that this is Trump trying to find a scapegoat and trying to use immigrants as a scapegoat. This is what this is really all about, okay? And he's trying to find a scapegoat to cover up for his malfeasance, to cover up for the fact that he has mishandled the economy and mishandled coronavirus. The action pauses the issuance of green cards with some exceptions. So this came out April 22nd, April 21st and April 22nd. Donald Trump signed an executive order on Wednesday, April 22nd, to pause the issuance of green cards for 60 days, describing it as an effort to protect Americans from competition from foreign workers during the coronavirus pandemic. This is similar to what President Herbert Hoover did in 1931 when during the Great Depression, and he blamed Mexicans for taking jobs away from white Americans, and he launched a campaign called American Jobs for Real Americans. American Jobs for Real Americans. Okay, so the order is effectively a restriction on entry that applies to people outside the U.S. seeking lawful permanent residency, which grants people the right to live and work in the U.S. and is a mandatory stepping stone to citizenship for all types of immigrants. It affects people applying for green cards through employment, family, or other means, with some significant exceptions. The announcement follows a late night tweet from Donald Trump on Monday night that came as a surprise even to many of his allies, with sweeping language that raised questions about whom it would affect. Okay, so they go on to answer some key questions. And let me see here. I think one of these other articles, administration. Okay, so they go on to answer the question, who is affected? So the order temporarily prohibits people outside the U.S. as of its signing from getting green cards. A major category of people who are banned are those seeking green cards through a family member of an American, a parent, an adult child, or a sibling. The order temporarily bars green card holders from sponsoring a spouse or a child for permanent residency. The executive order also stops individuals from receiving green cards to enter the U.S. through other means, such as employment or the EB-1 extraordinary ability category. Who is exempt? Because don't you need immigrants to pick the crops, pick the vegetables and fruits that Americans eat? There are several important carve-outs or exemptions. Spouses and children under 21 of American citizens can still get green cards. Spouses and children under 21 of American citizens can still get green cards. Medical professionals, defined as a physician, a nurse, or other healthcare professionals working to combat COVID-19 are exempt and may bring their spouses and unmarried children under 21. People applying for a green card through the EB-5 program which requires an investment of at least $900,000 that is expected to create jobs are exempt from the ban. So EB-5 program is it's a program where this is for wealthy immigrants coming to this country. If you invest in something like a construction of a building, okay, for instance, you invest $900,000 or more, your immigration process gets fast-tracked. It's the EB-5 program. People apply, look this up, EB-5 immigration program. People applying for a green card through the EB-5 program, which requires an investment of at least $900,000 that is expected to create jobs, are exempt from the ban. Members of the U.S. military are also excluded from the prohibition. The order similarly exempts people, quote, whose entry would be in the national interest, end quote, as determined by officials like the Secretary of State or Secretary of Homeland Security. So what about temporary work visas? The order does not prevent people from getting non-immigrant visas that are granted on a temporary basis and do not confer permanent residency or the promise of citizenship. The order does not prevent people from getting non-immigrant visas that are granted on a temporary basis and do not confer permanent residency or the promise of citizenship. That includes H-1B specialty workers, H-2A agriculture workers, and others. The executive order does not void any existing visa. Will this order affect tourists? No. Does this order affect people already in the United States? The order doesn't appear to stop foreigners lawfully here on visas from applying for green cards through the regular channels, said Greg Siskind, an immigration lawyer based in Memphis, Tennessee. Quote, if they are here on a non-immigrant visa, they can adjust status in the U.S. and don't have to make an entry, end quote, he said. Does this stop green card holders from becoming citizens? Does this stop green card holders from becoming citizens? No. They're still eligible to apply for naturalization through the existing channels. Well, isn't immigration already on hold? Effectively, yes. Citizenship and Immigration Services field offices, Citizenship and Immigration Services field offices in the U.S. are closed, which means appointments and naturalization ceremonies are not taking place. Around the world, routine visa processing for tourists and workers has been suspended. Restrictions are in place for non-essential travel. Restrictions are in place for non-essential travel, which means like flying on a plane, non-essential travel is prohibited. Refugee admissions have been halted, and a new border crackdown includes turning migrants away. To some extent, the order formalizes limits already in place. So the question is asked, well, is it all about politics? Trump has repeatedly leaned into the issue of immigration to fire up his base. That's what all this is about. Firing up his base. He fired up his base by getting them to go out to participate in these anti-stay-at-home protests. Some of these dumbasses are going to get coronavirus. Some are going to end up dying. And then he's also trying to galvanize his base through this 60-day immigration ban that really isn't an immigration ban. And he's trying to scapegoat immigrants and say we want to protect jobs for Americans. Right? You don't say anything about the fact that undocumented immigrants pay $20 billion in federal taxes each year. You don't say we don't want your federal taxes. But this is what President Herbert Hoover did in 1931. It didn't work then either, when he tried to scapegoat Mexicans. And he came up with the program Real American Jobs for Real Americans, because they wanted to protect, they said that Mexicans were taking jobs away from white people. That was largely not true. I'm going to come to that in a minute. History is repeating itself. So Trump has repeatedly leaned into the issue of immigration to fire up his base. Building a wall and barring entry for Muslims were central parts of his 2016 presidential campaign, central planks of his 2016 presidential campaign. It is a powerful issue for the older white and evangelical voters at the heart of his coalition. I thought the evangelicals were supposed to be all about Jesus. Wasn't Jesus a refugee? And Jesus was a refugee who was non-white too. Wasn't Jesus a refugee? How could people who claim to follow Jesus treat immigrants like that? Jesus was a refugee seeking refuge. How could people who claim to follow Jesus treat immigrants like that? It's like they're siding with Pharaoh as opposed to, quote unquote God's people. If you follow the Bible, it's like they totally have the Bible misconstrued. So on Tuesday, Trump's re-election campaign sent an email to supporters prompting the tweet and saying their, quote, input is crucial to the president's next steps, end quote. But overall, the U.S. is not sold on Trump's vision. Polls show that Americans oppose the wall and are split on the restriction on travel from majority Muslim nations. A recent YouGov survey, Y-O-U-G-O-V, YouGov survey, found the U.S. evenly divided, with 46% approving of Donald Trump's handling of immigration and 46% disapproving. Okay? Now, Democrats have criticized the move, accusing Trump of seeking to distract from his failures in dealing with the coronavirus by scapegoating immigrants. Representative Hakeem Jeffries, who represents New York, said he tweeted xenophobe in chief. And then we see Representative Joaquin Castro, Democrat of Texas, chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He called it, quote, an authoritarian-like move to take advantage of a crisis and advance his anti-immigrant agenda, end quote. So it's going to last 60 days. And let's see, Trump gets the authority to do this. Where does Trump get the authority to do this? The main statute cited in the order is Section 212, Section F of the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, which gives the president broad authority to block the entry of categories of people he deems detrimental to U.S. interests. It was previously invoked to ban narrow categories of individuals, including human rights violators and refugees from Cuba and Haiti. Donald Trump has sought to expand its use. This is also the law that Trump used for the Muslim ban. And there are other similarities. Trump's travel ban began as a sweeping call for a, quote, total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States, end quote, but eventually it narrowed to apply to several majority Muslim nations with national security as the justification so it could withstand legal scrutiny. Okay, so this from NBCnews.com. You can read this full article here. Trump halts immigration for 60 days. Here's what the president's order means. This is by Sahil Kapoor, K-A-P-U-R, for NBCnews.com. Then also we see that Washington Post has we see the Washington Post has a good article dealing with this also. Hold on, pull this one up here. Trump signs order pausing immigration for 60 days with exceptions. Trump signs order pausing immigration for 60 days with exceptions. This is from April 22nd, 2020, from the Washington Post. And let's see here, let me scroll down. The measure also freezes the diversity visa lottery, another frequent Trump target, which issues about 50,000 green cards annually. Legal permanent residents who are trying to bring their spouses and children into the country also will be unable to do so. President Trump's efforts will ensure we continue to put Americans first as we begin to reopen our country, the White House said in a statement following the publication of Trump's order Wednesday evening. The American people strongly support common sense efforts to restrict immigration as we confront the coronavirus. What he's really trying to do is distract from his mishandling of the economy and coronavirus, and then say we're trying to protect jobs from immigrants. Well, if you wanted to protect jobs from immigrants and undocumented immigrants, the first thing you would do is you would severely fine companies and corporations that exploit the labor of undocumented immigrants. Because he's not doing this. Because he's one of them. His golf courses and resorts have been known to employ undocumented immigrants. So Trump said his restrictions could be extended far longer than 60 days if he believes the U.S. economy could not absorb more immigrants. The U.S. State Department issued about 462,000 immigrant visas last year, and more than half went to applicants in the categories that will be frozen by Trump's decree. Let me see here. Let me scroll down. Some of the immigration restriction groups that have backed Trump's border agenda said they were disappointed that an executive order purportedly designed to protect U.S. jobs will have no bearing on temporary foreign workers. Trump said he is considering a subsequent order, but has not provided details on its scope. Mark Krokorian, director of the Center for Immigration Studies, a Washington-based group that wants to curb immigration, said it doesn't seem like it's going to do very much. The majority of green card recipients already live in the U.S. under some other status. If the point is to limit the number of foreigners entering the labor market, not including guest workers, isn't going to have much of an effect, end quote. This is all about galvanizing his base. He has declining approval ratings. He keeps having debacles every day at his White House coronavirus press conferences. This is all about galvanizing his base and throwing red meat to his base. The move is yet another attempt by the Trump administration to limit access to the country after it already has clamped down access to the United States by barring travelers from numerous countries, blocking access to U.S. asylum system, and immediately turning border crossers around at the U.S.-Mexico line. Now, Trump has used the pandemic to further seal off the nation, though his order is far more focused on economics than health. The United States already leads the world by far in confirmed coronavirus cases and deaths. The more than 830 cases is about 4 times the next country, Spain, which has 208,000 cases as of Tuesday. Okay, so check out the rest of this article here. This is from the Washington Post. They interviewed a woman, a Minneapolis immigration attorney, Sandra Feist, F-E-I-S-T, a Minneapolis immigration attorney, said the order is, quote unquote, pretty tame because it will not affect the hundreds of thousands of green card applicants already inside the U.S., but said it would have a profound impact on people seeking green cards from overseas. Her affected clients include an opera singer, a samba dancer, and chefs from China, tile layers, T-I-L-E, tile layers from Ecuador, an ad executive from Sweden, and a Brazilian jiu-jitsu expert who intended to open his own gym in the United States. She said, talk about stealing jobs. She said of her Brazilian jiu-jitsu expert client, he was coming here to create jobs. She said she feared the quote-unquote pause would be extended indefinitely and that it would be devastating for would-be immigrants and their families. Okay. Now, the White House statements characterized the order as a job-saving measure to protect U.S. workers, saying it would be, quote, unfair to allow Americans out of work due to the coronavirus to be replaced by new immigrant labor brought into the United States, end quote. Mass migration of low-skilled labor into the United States disproportionately harms historically disadvantaged Americans, the statement read. Now, when did you all of a sudden become concerned about historically disadvantaged Americans? Are those some of the people you're trying to take health care away from? Your Department of Justice is in court and is going before the U.S. Supreme Court after the election because Trump's Department of Justice, with Trump's approval, is trying to repeal the entire Affordable Health Care Act, which gave health care to 3 million non-elderly African Americans who did not already have health care. Texas A&M law professor Fatma Marouf, M-A-R-O-U-F, said although the impact is limited to would-be immigrants who live outside the country, the order carried language that troubled her. The 60-day moratorium can be extended and can eventually apply to immigrants who already live within the U.S. borders, he said. I worry that this is the beginning of more to come. He was also involved in litigation over Trump's early travel restrictions on majority Muslim countries. Okay, let me see here. Okay, you can read the rest of this article. It didn't really talk about the agricultural workers. There's an exemption for agriculture workers because they need immigrants to pick the crops. This is what Trump really don't want to talk about. They need immigrants to pick the crops, okay? Because white people are not going to get out there and do that. And we saw that was tried in 1968, and it didn't work then. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. Okay, so let's look at President Herbert Hoover, because Donald Trump, dealing with an economic catastrophe, dealing with a global pandemic, is really trying to distract people and throw red meat to his base with the immigration ban, which largely was already in effect. If we go back to early 1930s, we see President Herbert Hoover did something similar. If we look at this article from History.com, History.com is the official website of the History Channel. The U.S. deported 1 million of its own citizens to Mexico during the Great Depression. The U.S. deported 1 million of its own citizens to Mexico during the Great Depression. So up to 1.8 million people of Mexican descent, most of them American born, were rounded up in informal raids and deported in an effort to reserve jobs for white people. Jobs for white people. So to really understand this and to understand tensions between Mexico and the U.S., you really have to understand history going back about 170 years, dealing with Mexico and the U.S. Also, it's important to note that the U.S. It's also important to note that you had slaves that ran away from Texas and ran into Mexico as well. When Mexico wins its independence from Spain in 1829, there's going to be a Southern Underground Railroad also. We know about the Underground Railroad going up north and going into Canada, but there will also run one going south into Mexico, because Mexico is free territory. All right, so let's look at this article here from history.com. And then we also know that Vicente Guerrero, who was, if I remember correctly, was the second president of Mexico. He was a former slave. And some sources say he was the third president of Mexico. And he was of African descent. He was a former slave. And he's going to abolish slavery, okay, in Mexico. So in the 1930s, the Los Angeles Welfare Department decided to start deporting hospital patients of Mexican descent. One of the patients was a woman with leprosy who was driven just over the border and left in Mexicali, Mexico. Others had tuberculosis, paralysis, mental illness, or problems related to old age. But that did not stop orderlies from carrying them out of medical institutions and sending them out of the country. And I want to pull up this article from face-to-faceafrica.com also, dealing with Vicente Guerrero. Because I've talked about him before. There was a broadcast I did a couple months back dealing with, he was the first first black president of North America, Vicente Guerrero. There was an article from January 1st, 2020, I think it was, from face-to-faceafrica.com, the first black president of Mexico whose execution shocked the nation. And he becomes president like 1828, 1829. All right, so they're going to have these raids. They're going to round up Mexicans. One of the patients was a woman with leprosy who was driven just over the border and left in Mexicali, Mexico. Others had tuberculosis, paralysis, mental illness, or problems related to old age. But that did not stop orderlies from carrying them out of medical institutions and sending them out of the country. These were the repatriation drives. Which were a series of informal raids that took place around the United States during the Great Depression. Local governments and officials deported up to 1.8 million people to Mexico, according to research conducted by Joseph Dunn, D-U-N-N, he's a former California state senator. And Joseph Dunn estimates around 60% of these people were actually American citizens. He estimates that around 60% of these people were actually American citizens, many of them born in the U.S. to first-generation immigrants. For these citizens, deportation was not repatriation, it was exile from their own country because they were born here. They were actually U.S. citizens. But in an effort to protect jobs for white people, part of this campaign coming from Herbert Hoover, President Herbert Hoover, they're deporting them. The logic behind these raids was that Mexican immigrants were supposedly using resources and working jobs that should go to white Americans affected by the Great Depression. Okay? The logic behind these raids was that Mexican Americans were supposedly using resources and working jobs that should go to white Americans affected by the Great Depression. These deportations happened not only in border states like California and Texas, but also in places like Michigan, Colorado, Illinois, Ohio, and New York. In 2003, a Detroit-born U.S. citizen named Jose Lopez testified before a California legislative committee about his family's 1931 deportation to Michoacan, Michoacan, which is a state in western Mexico. He said, quote, "I was 5 years old when we were forced to relocate." He said, "I became very sick with whooping cough and suffered very much, and it was difficult to breathe. After both of his parents and one brother died in Mexico, he and his surviving siblings managed to return to the U.S. in 1945. He said, quote, "We were lucky to come back," end quote. "But there are others that were not so fortunate." So the raid tore apart families and communities, leaving lasting trauma for Mexican Americans who remained in the U.S. as well. Former California State Senator Martha M. Escutia, Escutia, has said that growing up in East Los Angeles, her immigrant grandfather never even walked to the corner grocery store without his passport for a fear of being stopped and deported. Even after he became a naturalized citizen, he continued to carry it with him. So the deportation of U.S. citizens has always been unconstitutional, yet scholars argue the way in which repatriation drives deported non-citizens was unconstitutional too. So Kevin R. Johnson is a dean and professor of public interest law and Chicano studies at the University of California, Davis School of Law. He said, quote, "One of the issues is the repatriation took place without any legal protections in place or any kind of due process. So you could argue that all of them were unconstitutional. All of them were illegal because no modicum of process was followed. So instead, local governments and officers with little knowledge of immigrants' rights simply arrested people and put them on trucks, buses, or trains bound for Mexico, regardless of whether they were documented immigrants or even native-born citizens. Deporters rounded up children and adults however they could, often raiding public places where they thought Mexican Americans hung out. In 1931, one Los Angeles raid rounded up more than 400 people at La Placita Park and deported them to Mexico. These raids were, quote, different in some ways from what's going on today. Okay, Johnson says these raids were, quote, different in some ways from what's going on today, Johnson says. Although the federal government in the 1930s did prosecute 44,000 people under Section 1325, the same law that criminalizes unauthorized entry today. These criminal prosecutions were separate from the local raids, which were informal and lacked any due process. He went on to say there's also a much more active group of lawyers advocating on behalf of immigrants today. In the 1930s, there was nothing like that. So although there was no federal law, or executive order authorizing the 1930s raids, President Herbert Hoover's administration used the racially coded language, American jobs for real Americans. American jobs for real Americans. Implicitly approved of them. Okay, President Herbert Hoover's administration, which used the racially coded slogan "American Jobs for Real Americans," implicitly approved of them. His Secretary of Labor, William Doak, D-O-A-K, also helped pass local laws and arrange agreements that prevented Mexican Americans from holding jobs. Some laws banned Mexican Americans from government employment regardless of their citizenship status, meaning even if they were a U.S. citizen, some laws banned Mexican Americans who were U.S. citizens from holding government jobs. Meanwhile, companies like Ford Motor Company, U.S. Steel, and Southern Pacific Railroad agreed to lay off thousands of Mexican American workers. However, modern economists who have studied the effect of the 1930s repatriation drives on cities argue the raids did not boost local economies. The repatriation of Mexicans, who were mostly laborers and farm workers, reduced demand for other jobs, mainly held by natives, such as skilled craftsmen and managerial, administrative, and sales jobs, writes economists in a 2017 academic paper circulated by the nonpartisan National Bureau of Economic Research. Quote, in fact, our estimates suggest that it may have further increased their levels of unemployment and depressed their wages, end quote. Because what happens is now Dr. William Spriggs has talked about this, and he's an economist at Howard University. And he studies immigration things like this. And I wrote an article dealing with, there was a segment on News One Now with Roland Martin. He had Dr. William Spriggs on, another economist. And they were dealing with the myth that immigrants are taking jobs in large scale, immigrants taking jobs away from African Americans. I'm not talking about isolated incidences or anecdotes. We're talking about a large scale. And one of the things Dr. William Spriggs talked about is how whether you talk about immigrants or even undocumented immigrants, when they do jobs, a lot of jobs that they're doing, one, are jobs that Americans don't want, especially working in agriculture. But when they do jobs, when they work, they actually create jobs because they take the money that they make and they spend money in the economy, which creates jobs. They go to grocery stores, they buy food, they buy clothes, they buy all different types of things. That actually creates jobs. What they found in 1930 is when you deported those Mexican Americans, many of them U.S. citizens, some of them undocumented, that hurt the economy because they were doing jobs that Americans didn't want to do. And when you remove them, the money that they were spending, right, disappears also. And this is what a lot of people don't want to talk about. So let me back up again. The repatriation of Mexicans who were mostly laborers and farm workers reduced demand for other jobs mainly held by natives, such as skilled craftsmen and managerial, administrative, and sales jobs. Write economists in a 2017 academic paper circulated by the nonpartisan National Bureau of Economic Research. Quote, in fact, our estimates suggest that it may have further increased their levels of unemployment and depressed their wages, end quote. Now, Herbert Hoover lost the presidential election in 1932 because voters who now refer to shanty towns as Hoovervilles blamed him for the ongoing depression. Indeed, Herbert Hoover's decision to raise import tariffs did prolong the depression at home and abroad. Just like Trump put tariffs on Chinese products, which is drastically hurting farmers, including African American farmers. And we know in 2019, Bankruptcies among farmers increased by 20%. If white farmers are filing for bankruptcy, what do you think is the economic condition of African American farmers? So President Franklin Delano Roosevelt did not officially sanction repatriation drives, but neither did he suppress them. These raids continued under his administration and only really died out during World War II when the U.S. began recruiting temporary Mexican workers through the Bracero program because it needed the wartime labor. They still need it. So you deported Mexican workers, then you want to bring them back because you still need their labor. So check out the rest of this article. This is from history.com. The U.S. deported 1 million of its own citizens to Mexico during the Great Depression. And they also talk about Herbert Hoover's American Jobs for Real Americans, which reminds me of Make America Great Again, because they were both for white people. Then we look at Washington Post had an article dealing with this from, I think, September 2019. Because this is history repeating itself. President Herbert Hoover deported 1 million Mexican Americans for supposedly stealing U.S. jobs. The name of this article, The Time a President Deported 1 million Mexican Americans for supposedly stealing 1 million jobs. For supposedly stealing U.S. jobs. This is from August 13th, 2018. August 13th, 2018, from Washington Post by Diane Bernard. So they talk about 1931, talk about a raid taking place, and then, okay, so August was rounded up. So the raid came at the height, let's see here, let me back up here. The raid came at the height of the Great Depression and on the heels of President Herbert Hoover's announcement of a national program of American Jobs for Real Americans, code words for getting rid of Mexicans who were not considered real Americans, said Joseph Dunn. Joseph Dunn was quoted in this article as well. The program implemented by Herbert Hoover's Secretary of Labor, William Doak, D-O-A-K, included passing local laws forbidding government employment of anyone of Mexican descent, even legal permanent residents and U.S. citizens. Major companies, including Ford, U.S. Steel, and Southern Pacific Railroad, colluded with the government by telling Mexicans they would be better off with their own people and laid off thousands of them. Let's see here. Let me scroll down. So, fear swept through Mexican communities nationwide throughout the early 1930s as local law enforcement rounded up people in parks, hospitals, and markets and social clubs, crammed them onto chartered trains, and deposited them across the U.S.-Mexico border. Quote, around the country, Mexicans were scapegoated for the bad economy and became victims of cruel dilemmas. Dilemmas, said Francisco Balderramo, Professor Emeritus of History and Chicano Studies at California State University at Los Angeles and a co-author of Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in the 1930s. Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in the 1930s, which is a book based on oral histories and archival research. In addition to claiming that Mexican deportations would create more jobs, officials also said that Mexicans were overwhelming welfare offices and draining charities set up for the needy during a time of economic calamity. This is some of the same rhetoric you hear today. This is some of the same rhetoric you hear today. Yet during the early years of the Great Depression, Mexicans, quote, comprised less than 10% of the relief recipients across the country, end quote, according to Decade of Betrayal. Herbert Hoover's approach is echoed in the Trump administration's immigration policies. Quote, there's no question in the minds of many, that Trump's zero tolerance policy and increased ICE raids has strains of what occurred to Mexicans in the 1930s, end quote, Joseph Dunn said. But the difference between the two presidents' approaches to deportations lies in Herbert Hoover's use of the term repatriation. Balderrama said, Francisco Balderrama. The word suggests a voluntary return to your birthplace, and Mexican repatriation was viewed as a humanitarian gesture by the administration and the public. So Joseph Dunn's research shows that about 1.8 million Mexicans were deported during the 1930s. Of that number, about 60% were U.S. citizens. And let's see, let's look at here if I have any more notes on this. Okay, read the rest of his articles. This is about 7 pages. So the deportations continued well into the 1930s, even after Democrat President Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in January 1933. Roosevelt never officially revoked the American Jobs for Real Americans campaign. He never officially revoked the American Jobs for Real Americans campaign. But by 1933, it was being carried out solely by local governments that acted on their own, and his administration did nothing to stop them. It just faded away by the end of the 1930s, and then World War II brought jobs back. So the scapegoating of Mexicans eased up, Joseph Dunn said. So read this full article. This is at HuffingtonPost.com. WashingtonPost.com. The time a president deported 1 million Mexican Americans for supposedly stealing U.S. jobs. This is the same rhetoric Trump is talking about today. What now? You were just you have been bragging about each month there's 6 or 7 million unfilled jobs that go unfilled each month. Each month the economy had 6 or 7 million jobs that will go unfilled. Okay, now you're trying to use immigrants as a scapegoat to distract from your malfeasance in mishandling the economy and mishandling coronavirus. And then if we look at, I talked briefly about some of the history of runaway African slaves going into Mexico. Read the article from history.com, the little known underground railroad that ran south to Mexico. The little known underground railroad that ran south to Mexico. So Mexico abolished slavery in 1829, and Vicente Guerrero becomes president. And we also know that the Texas Rangers were formed in 1836. The Texas Rangers started out as bounty hunters who were hired by slave owners in Texas to go into Mexico and capture runaway slaves and bring them back to Texas. This is how the Texas Rangers, who were state police in Texas, this is how they started. It's estimated that 5,000 to 10,000 Africans escaped from bondage from the U.S. in general into Mexico, says Maria Hammack, Hammack, who is writing her dissertation about this topic at the University of Texas at Austin. But she thinks the actual number could even be higher. And let me pull this up here. She said these were clandestine routes, and if you got caught, you would be killed and lynched. So people didn't leave a lot of records, she said. There's some evidence that Tejanos, Tejanos, or Mexicans in Texas, Tejanos, or Mexicans in Texas, acted as conductors on the southern route by helping people get to Mexico. In addition, Maria Hammock has also identified an African American woman and two white men who helped enslaved workers escape and tried to find a home for them in Mexico. Now, Mexico abolished slavery in 1829 when Texas was still part of the country, in part prompting white slave-holding immigrants to fight for independence in the Texas Revolution. Once they formed the Republic of Texas in 1836, they made slavery legal again. And it continued to be legal when Texas joined the U.S. as a state in 1845. Okay, so read this article here from History.com. The little-known underground railroad that ran south to Mexico. This is by Becky Little for History.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. Then also read about Vicente Guerrero, who was a black president of Mexico. And FaceToFaceAfrica.com has a good article about him, the first black president of Mexico whose executions shocked the nation. Okay, that's by Mildred Europa Taylor from January 1st, 2020 for FaceToFaceAfrica.com. FaceToFaceAfrica.com. Okay, so be sure to listen to my Sunday night show, the African History Network show, Sundays 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, WFDF. All of my DVD lectures are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and we have my bundle packs there. We have the Black Migration 1619 to 2019 bundle pack. We have my presentation dealing with 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans. And follow us on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Turn on notifications so you know when I go live. Also follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Turn on notifications there so you know when I go live also. And we have most of these broadcasts in audio podcast format. We're on 8 different podcast platforms. iTunes, Stitcher, Castbox, Acast, FM Player, TuneIn. Just search for the African History Network show where you get your podcast, the African History Network show. Or you can go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Right on the homepage, click on Listen to Podcasts. Okay, at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you want to donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App. Also PayPal.me / the AHN show. PayPal.me / the AHN show through PayPal. Even though people are not flying, some people may still want to carry their culture with them. However they travel. BlackLionLeather.com can help you with this. BlackLionLeather.com is an African American owned travel accessory company that sells leather travel accessories. They manufacture and sell online to a culturally inspired African American traveler. They are 100% black owned and operated. Their tagline is "Carry Your Culture." Carry your culture. Visit their website, BlackLionLeather.com. BlackLionLeather.com. You can see the beautiful travel accessories that they have there that you can purchase. Okay, so a lot of people want to get their financial house in order. They have more time. They're quarantined. And they realize, look, they need to get that financial house in order. Certified financial planner Martisha Patterson can help you with this. Visit our website, PattersonPlans17.com. PattersonPlans, the number 17.com. She is a certified financial planner with 20 years in the wealth management industry. And she will help you apply proven tools, techniques, and strategies so you can meet your financial goals. Okay, you can contact her for a free consultation today. Give her a call at 646-552-4384. 646-552-4384. Also visit our website, PattersonPlans, the number 17.com. PattersonPlans, the number 17.com. Okay, so a lot of people have been at home. They've been eating things they shouldn't eat, and they realize, okay, I need to get into shape. I need to get back into shape. Spring is here. Summer is coming soon. SheRanHerselfFit.com can help you with this. Now, She Ran Herself Fit's mission is to inspire and motivate women to make healthy lifestyle changes. She Ran Herself Fit is a brand that promotes women living a healthy lifestyle. By making small sacrifices in your daily routine and changing your diet, you can combat many of the different diseases that are prevalent in the African American community. The founder of She Ran Herself Fit, her name is Felicia. Felicia lost over 200 pounds by changing her diet and running. Now, running may not be your motivation, so you want to find out what drives you to be fit. At SheRanHerselfFit.com, they also sell workout apparel, fitness apparel for you as well. So visit the website today, SheRanHerselfFit.com. Let them know you found out about this from the African History Network. Okay, email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com if you want to find out about advertising with the African History Network. CustomerService@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, look, hey, we have to get out of here. Remember, the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct your own behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right now it's correct your own behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.